Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Podcast YouTube channel. The observant amongst you will have noticed that this is not a Tifo podcast. No, this is even better. It's an episode of the Ornstein Chapman Podcast, the flagship podcast from The Athletic, bringing you all the best and latest news in football. Today's episode is hosted by the great David Ornstein and features James McNicholas talking about Arteta's rebuilding project, Jonathan Barnett on Bale's future at Real Madrid, Sam Lee on Pep Guardiola's new number 2, and Gregg Evans on the future of Jack Grealish. Video versions of the Ornstein Chapman podcast will start to appear on the Tifo Podcast YouTube channel. Every episode is fantastic and we're delighted to be able to bring them to you in this format. So without further ado, here's David Ornstein.
Welcome to the Ornstein Chapman Podcast on The Athletic. Coming up today, we speak to the agent Jonathan Barnett about Gareth Bale and what he expects to see from a very different transfer market. James McNicholas joins me to discuss the work Mikel Arteta is doing to turn things round at Arsenal. Our Manchester City writer Sam Lee provides a guide to Pep Guardiola's new assistant and tells us why Leroy Sané is leaving the Etihad. And our man on the Aston Villa beat, Gregg Evans, gives us an update on the future of Jack Grealish. Now, it's been a bitterly disappointing return to Premier League action for Arsenal. On and off the pitch, there have been all manner of issues. Mikel Arteta, their manager, would certainly seem to have his work cut out. I'm delighted to be joined by my Athletic colleague and Arsenal writer, James McNicholas. James, where to begin? Probably in the wake of the defeat to Brighton, I guess. And a piece that you've got up on The Athletic, I would urge everyone to go and have a read of it, where you ask the question, where does Mikel Arteta begin? And so I'll ask that very question to you.
Yeah, start with an easy one. It has been a really disappointing start to recommencement, should we say, to this season for Arsenal. And I think doubly so because there was so much optimism coming in. You know, Mikel Arteta made a really positive impression in his first few months in charge, and it went beyond that. I think there were some really encouraging results, and the team had been unbeaten, at least in the Premier League or domestically, since the turn of the year. But it feels like that momentum has really evaporated now, and he's kind of back to the drawing board at this point.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a mess, hasn't it? The injuries have not been Arsenal's fault. The trouble travelling to Manchester for the first game was not Arsenal's fault. The story we revealed in my column on Monday about Arsenal having a positive coronavirus test in the build-up to the Manchester City game that meant 3 players, the positive test, and then 2 that had been in contact with that player, close contact, needed to go into isolation, missed 3 days of training, then a load of negative tests were done, and they were cleared by the Premier League and government to return to training and play on the eve of the game. It just seems like a bit of chaos.
I mean, there is definitely a strong degree of misfortune here, but it's so damaging to Mikel Arteta's preparations. I mean, when you sit back and you look at his first 6 months in charge of the club, the stuff that he's had to face in that period, you know, the amount of times the word unprecedented has been used to describe the current circumstances, what it must be like for a manager in his first 6 months in the top job as a head coach, I can only begin to imagine.
Yeah, you mentioned the 6 months of Mikel Arteta, and last Wednesday on The Athletic, we did a big read on this that I thought brought so much fascinating insight into both Mikel Arteta, the person, the professional, but also the project that he's embarking upon. There are so many challenges, many of them you've mentioned on the pitch, to do with personnel, others to do with culture, attitude. But the thing that struck me the most from working with you and Amy Lawrence on that piece was that he is going to need time and support. If I cast my mind back to when he was appointed, I was speaking to somebody closely involved at the club, and they said they don't think it's a case of whether or not Mikel Arteta will let Arsenal down, but whether or not the club let Mikel Arteta down.
Well, I think that is a fascinating point because, as we discovered in writing that piece about Mikel Arteta, he's incredibly well thought of. He's also the first person really to say that he's not achieved anything yet. And I think it's important to remember that for all the optimism that had built up in the Arsenal camp, even during the break, with people looking forward to seeing how this team might have evolved, I think Arteta's feet were always pretty firmly on the ground. I think he knows that there's a long, long way to go. And like you say, he'll need time. But He's also the second head coach at Arsenal after Unai Emery to be working in a new structure, which is a bit of a departure for the club. Arsene Wenger was a manager in the truest sense, in that he had authority on a great degree of football matters, although that was shared a little bit towards the end of his reign. Arteta, he's the head coach, and there's a head of football there, there's a technical director there. And they, of course, are responsible in this situation too. So if we talk about something like the contractual issues they're facing with David Luiz, Mikel Arteta and to a certain extent Edu might have a technical point of view on a player like Luiz, but that might not be the view that ultimately plays out. There are other people on that committee with other priorities who have to look at the bigger picture. So it's a really, really fascinating period for Arsenal, and one in which I think we're going to learn a lot. Not just about Arteta, but I think about the hierarchy at Arsenal, about their priorities, about the problems they face, about the decisions they feel comfortable to make in the current economic circumstances. And I think that Arteta is so well thought of as a coach. The truest test is really whether he gets the right support now. And that support could exist in a variety of different ways. It could exist in terms of the transfer market, although Arsenal will be going into that like many Premier League clubs with a hand tied behind their back as a consequence of the financial situation. But it may just be about giving him the support to implement the changes he wants. He wants to make a cultural change at Arsenal. His assistant Steve Round's been on record about that, talking about wanting to change the culture, change the perception, change the attitudes internally. And I think to a certain extent, that is what Unai Emery tried to do, but he was not able to do it. Ultimately, he failed. Arteta now has to see that through. And if he's going to do that, I think it's going to require support from above as well as below.
Well, talking of which, I spoke to Josh Kroenke and Edu for this piece, and I could tell how impressed they've been by Mikel Arteta as a person and as a professional. And I really do think they're going to back him in a way that they should. In this situation, I know how highly thought of Mikel Arteta is by other clubs, and if it doesn't go right at Arsenal, I think it will go right for him in his career, because people I trust and who have seen him at work and who know him talk about what a special coach he is, and that he's going to have, in their view, a very special coaching career. But do you sense any frustration brewing on his part over what the project is, how much support, as you put it, he will receive, and whether he can implement what he wants to at Arsenal?
I think that whatever roadmap Arsenal and Mikel Arteta might have laid out and decided upon, when he was first appointed back in December, presumably has to be thrown out the window to an extent at this point. And I have great sympathy with the club in that regard, because nobody could have anticipated what would happen with global events. Nobody could have anticipated the knock-on effect for football. And, Arsenal, one of those clubs for whom matchday revenue is a significant factor for them. And to be without that, that is going to alter things. That is going to change plans. And Arteta has alluded to that himself in regards to the transfer market, saying, he might have been considering certain plans back in the spring, before the coronavirus crisis. Maybe those plans have to be revised now. But we know Mikel Arteta, we know he understands this crisis probably better than many people, having suffered from coronavirus himself. We know that he's got that great human element to his personality. I do get the sense that he is the sort of character who, if he's told, look, we can't move as quickly as we thought we might be able to. This is going to be a long-term plan, but here are the ways in which we're able to support you. I do get the sense that he might commit to that, because I think that Arsenal means an enormous amount to him. I think he appreciates that he has this opportunity. I think he recognises that the hierarchy at the club have taken a little bit of a gamble with him, as well thought of as he is, because of his inexperience. And I think he's absolutely determined to be a success in his first role in management. I mean, I don't know what your impression, David, was from the conversations that you had with people, but I do think that Arteta sees this as a project that does require a degree of longevity, that he's not going to be able to fix Arsenal's problems on the pitch or off it overnight.
I think the lack of discipline showed by Matteo Guendouzi will have infuriated Mikel Arteta. Then when you look around the squad and the club, really, so many issues that are like deja vu to me. We've got the Mesut Ozil situation, whether he plays or not. He seems to be the biggest story for at least a few hours around every match. You've got the contract situations around Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Bukayo Saka, Then the short-term issues around David Luiz and the noise surrounding that, and his agent Kia Joorabchian speaking publicly, whether you want to say an unfortunate or a mistake around the signing of Cedric Suarez from Southampton on loan. All these issues make me think we've been here before. I was going to get stuck into the Mesut Ozil situation with you, but we know he's been very clear on the fact that he is not going to be leaving before the end of his contract. And so it's one that Arsenal need to sort out or find a compromise to. And so one thing I do want to get your view on is Matteo Guendouzi. We reported, and it was widely reported, of his indiscretions on the Dubai winter training camp. I've heard a number of other stories about his discipline. We know his talent, but then we saw another incident at the end of the Brighton game. I know there are some at Arsenal who are fed up with him and think he should be sold. Well, it doesn't mean he will be sold. There could be people who still believe he can fulfill his potential. There may not be the market that Arsenal would expect for him. Where do you think it's going with him?
It's funny you mentioned Mesut Ozil, because at Arsenal, he's become such a divisive player. You know, if you speak to a group of supporters about him, you'll get half who say he's a genius, he should play every week. You'll get another half who say he's paid far too much money and doesn't deliver. I kind of feel like we're entering a similar thing with Matteo Guendouzi. I wrote a profile about him a couple of months ago for The Athletic, which is worth checking out, where we spoke to a number of people who have worked with Guendouzi as a young player in France and in England. And his advocates absolutely maintain that this kind of abrasive character that he has is integral to his success. And when he walked into Arsenal, arrived there as a teenager, 19 years old, I think he was, walked into that dressing room, immediately became kind of buddies with established stars like Aubameyang and Lacazette. There is a degree to which that ego and that self-confidence certainly helped him. And he's one of those players who plays with that element of needle. He's one of those players opposition fans, you know, love to hate. He's got that kind of slight wind-up mentality to him. I think that the bigger problem for me is it being channeled correctly? You know, he really does have this inherent intensity, this inherent energy that comes out of him. And in his best performances at Arsenal, I think there was one North London derby in which he was particularly excellent. I remember a game against Aston Villa earlier this season where he really helped turn it around for Arsenal to come behind and win. You see that energy flow out of him, and he can, at his very best, on occasion, kind of take a game by the scruff of the neck. And we've all seen that. And that's as much about force of personality as it is talent. Now, the trouble is that can boil over, as it did at Brighton at the weekend. And if it isn't channeled correctly, if it's not channeled constructively, it can cause problems. You've got to look at someone with that potential and think, you know, we could make a hell of a player out of this guy. But he's not there yet.
Well, he'll need to be on his toes and get his act together, you could say, because we understand that Arsenal would like to sign a central midfielder this summer, whether it's holding or box-to-box. Arsenal's central midfield has contributed just one goal between them this season, and so that's a really interesting area. I think Mikel Arteta would have given it to the squad in the dressing room after the game at Brighton from an emotional and footballing perspective, and also in training on Sunday. I'm sure that would have been reiterated then. So it'll be fascinating to see how they respond at Southampton on Thursday, and then at Sheffield United in their next match. 2 away games for a team that has such a wretched away record.
I know it's painful to lose football matches, but there is a bigger picture here, and I hope that Mikel Arteta and the people around him and above him are looking at that bigger picture. And as much as they would like to qualify for Europe because of the financial boost it would give them at a time where the finances are more precarious than they have been for some time, there would be a benefit to this young, inexperienced squad, maybe just focusing on the Premier League next season. Especially, we're talking about the travel implications in going away in the Premier League now. Imagine if it's going away in Europe. That could bring with it a host of problems. I do think that things might have to get worse before they get better. But as we wrote in our Arteta profile, there is a lot of confidence that they have a man there who does have the foresight, who does have the force of personality, the character to implement those changes. And having failed in that pursuit with the Unai Emery project, they really do have to commit to this Arteta one. And it has to work this time, or Arsenal are in real danger of becoming what they look like at the moment, which is a mid-table club.
And there is only so much that he can do. The rest comes down to the players on the pitch, the personnel, and that's why recruitment will be so important. It's why there'll be a great deal of focus on Edu as well as the technical director. And we know Arsenal want reinforcements in central defence, possibly now a goalkeeper. Despite the faith they have in Emi Martinez, they may be one significant player down if Bernd Leno is out for as long as it's feared. We talked about the midfield. There's a wide player desired by Arteta, and on that list of options is Willian, who will become a free agent, which is attractive, and also he's a very experienced, high-performing professional who may be able to help this development phase and help bring on these young players you talk about, but equally there's no guarantee that will happen. There'll be interest from other clubs. We hear Tottenham linked, and there'll be others around Europe too. So that's one for Arsenal to ponder. Talking of wide players, there have been a lot of questions to us about Gabriel Martinelli. Our understanding is that nothing is really going on. I'm not sure that he returned, like many players, in as good a condition after the COVID shutdown than he was in before he left. And I don't mean from a physical perspective, but just sharpness. I expect that he'll feature in the coming games, and that's a huge cause for optimism for Arsenal fans going forward. James, thank you so much for coming on. As well as writing about Arsenal, you can listen to James on the Handbrake Off podcast, which is part of The Athletic's comprehensive stable of club podcasts. We have 15 club-specific shows releasing episodes every single week. So if you're a fan of Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester City, Man United, Newcastle, Spurs, Leeds, or many others, there's a podcast just for you. It's the perfect place to hear the reaction to your team's performances now that the season is back underway, with our expert journalists bringing you all the big news and reaction as the season reaches its conclusion. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the best known and most influential people in the game, the agent Jonathan Barnett, who has a host of top players on his books, including Gareth Bale and Jack Grealish. We record this podcast the day before the deadline set by the Premier League for clubs to finalise decisions in relation to contracts that expire on June the 30th. Can you give us an impression of how stressful this period has been for clubs, for players, for agents, as we approach this deadline and we try to sort out the futures? What are your latest thoughts on how the summer's transfer window will look? And will the crisis that we've been going through sort of change how the market looks forever, in your opinion?
100% not forever. And I don't think that's, but I think in the short term, we have to wait and see. And I'm sure in some ways it will. But we have to wait and see. It's all unknown. I'm sure that this window will be different to anything before. There will be deals, but there'll be a lot less deals maybe. You can't compare a second division club with a Premier club or a top Premiership club with the top of the Championship. Everyone's different.
What are agents doing at the moment? Are they negotiating deals? Are they talking about new contracts? Can they meet face-to-face? Or is it all very quiet until the window opens? Can you give our audiences a bit of an insight into, is it frantic or is it actually quite calm at the moment? What's going on?
Agents aren't there just to negotiate a contract. I'm talking about myself. Proper agents are there to look after the interests of their clients. So all year round, they're looking after their clients, doing certain things, marketing, sponsorship, social media, personal stuff. So it's all going on still the same as before. Obviously, maybe even some more things have to be looked after, their finances and things. But basically, it's always busy. There's a misnomer that agents are running around doing deals. Doing a deal for a client is only part of the business of being an agent.
We've talked about pay cuts for players over recent months, salary deferrals. One thing I was keen to ask, are agents missing payments at the moment? Have they also been deferred or just not paid?
Yes. I think one of the biggest problems for agents is the cash flow, like anybody else. I'm sure a lot of the clubs will pay, but a lot of them are paying very slowly or not at all. What really upsets an agent, on us speaking, is if we're ignored. If a club comes to us with a genuine problem, and I mean genuine, then obviously we'll look to see if we can help.
Our listeners in the UK will be surprised that Gareth Bale, your player, who you've represented throughout his career, isn't playing at the moment for Real Madrid, and I presume he's fit. Can you tell us what's going on there?
No, it's fine. It's just one of those things. There's nothing everybody should be worried about. He's fine. He likes living in Madrid, and he's fine.
The relationship with Zidane and the Real Madrid hierarchy has been talked about a lot, how close he came to leaving Real Madrid for China. Do you think Gareth will be staying there for the foreseeable future? And what's the relationship like?
Relationships are something we don't discuss openly. But he's fine. He's happy there. He's got a couple more years of his contract, and that's where he is.
Is there any chance we could see Gareth coming back to the Premier League?
Every day changes. As I see it, I think it'll be Real Madrid. But things change. But it will be. At the moment, it's Real Madrid.
Another client of yours who's being talked about even more than Gareth Bale is Jack Grealish, and people suggesting that he could be making a huge move to Manchester United or even elsewhere. Do we know anything on Jack yet?
Jack is captain of Aston Villa. His first priority at the moment is to make sure that they survive in the Premiership. And until that's sorted out, we don't have the discussion. He's got his priorities right. He has a job, and that's what he's going to do. He's going to fight hard for Aston Villa.
Thank you very much for your time, Jonathan, as always, and we wish you all the best for the coming weeks and months.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Hello, I'm James Richardson, host of the Totally Football Show, now part of the Athletics Podcast Network. We're going to be here following all the action as the 2020 football season reaches its belated conclusion. And if you're an Athletics subscriber, you can now hear exclusive ad-free versions of our show on the Athletic app. And don't worry, if you're not a subscriber, you can still listen to us for free with the occasional word from our sponsor by searching for The Totally Football Show on Apple, Spotify and all the usual podcast places. The Totally Football Show with me, James Richardson, still totally free and now totally ad-free on The Athletic.
Now, according to sources who have spoken to The Athletic's Sam Lee, Juanma Lillo's arrival as Pep Guardiola's assistant will offer the club a fresh approach, another voice as they bid to win this season's Champions League and compete for the Premier League title again next season. I'm pleased to say Sam joins us now. Sam, give us a little background on Lillo and his relationship with Pep.
Juanma Lillo, I think he started coaching, I think he said he was 19, but he was 26 when he was in charge of Salamanca, and he got then promoted to La Liga, and he became at 29 the youngest coach in La Liga history. Still, that's the record that stands today. He was Real Oviedo manager in the mid-90s. They played against Barca, and from people I've spoken to, when Pep saw them, because obviously Pep had his ideas very clear even then, he saw this team and he thought, something's, I like this, something's happening here, something special's happening here. So when they played Barca at Camp Nou, he went and knocked on his door afterwards and said, can I have a chat? So it kind of started there. 2003 presidential election, Joan Laporta obviously gave Pep his big break in management in 2008, but if he'd have lost that, Pep would have been the sporting director at Barca, and Juanma Lillo would have come in. A lot of people say he would have been the manager, but I don't know, somebody told me it would have been Ronald Koeman. Lillo would have been overseeing the coaches of the youth teams at Barca to make sure that their youth teams are still playing in that Barca way. So you can see already how similarly they think about stuff. Guardiola, at the end of his playing career, he got offers from all over the place, but he went to Mexico, very small wages comparatively, where Juanma Lillo was a coach, just so he could work with him. When Guardiola did his first steps in management in 2007 at Barca B, he went to prepare the season with Juanma Lillo at his house. So, it goes back years, and obviously in the last 12 years or so, they've gone in different directions. Lillo has got a mixed reputation in Spain. Some see him as like a teacher, a perfect coach, great attacking football, great philosophy, great ideas. He can actually get those ideas across to his teams as well, to his players individually, and that's what he'll bring to City. Very good man-manager, and very good at getting kind of Guardiola-esque ideas across, but has never stayed at a club for more than one season in the last 20 years. Never won a cup. He's got 4 promotions, but never won a cup, never had the success as you would normally gauge it as a manager. So yeah, quite a polarised figure in Spain and in South America to an extent, but on the same wavelength as Guardiola. Guardiola loves him and considers him a reference point right up there with Johan Cruyff, and he's bringing him to City, to be challenged.
I suspect being number 2 to Pep is one of the most sought after jobs in the world of assistant managers, number 2s. So were there a number of other interested candidates, or candidates who Pep and City were interested in before they plumped for Lillo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose, yeah, if you're thinking about it from the point of view of the coaches around Europe with UEFA Pro licenses who would love to be, Guardiola's assistant, if that job was ever advertised, there'd be thousands of people trying to do it, but it's very specific. You can't, you've got to wait for the call from Guardiola. So yeah, as reported elsewhere, Vincent Kompany was certainly thought about. I've been able to confirm that as well. I couldn't tell you exactly the kind of conversations they had or how concrete the offer was, but at the end it was basically made clear that it wouldn't be Kompany. Xabi Alonso as well, that was reported in Spain, and again, that's been something I was, someone close to Pep told me that Alonso was definitely thought about as well. But again, I couldn't tell you to what extent. And then the new name that I don't think had been linked, but I've been told about, maybe not so recently, but in the past, Albert Celades is the Valencia coach at the moment, which obviously makes it very unlikely. But he used to be assistant at Real Madrid. He was the assistant at Spain. He was in the Barca youth team and the Barca first team during the 90s with Pep. So they go way back. And obviously, if you're Valencia coach now, you're going to have coaching credentials, certainly. So that is one name. And, if it doesn't go so well at Valencia and they're 8th this year, in the last 2 years, they finished 4th and got in the Champions League. So if his coaching career doesn't go so well, that may be a link-up we look to see in the future, because obviously with Dominic Torrent, one of Guardiola's long-term assistants, he's obviously gone into management and is now looking for a job after being at New York, and Arteta's obviously at Arsenal. So, when you get to that stage in the future and the pool gets smaller and smaller, it may not be Kompany, it may not be Alonso in the future, but maybe Albert Celades is one to keep an eye on.
One to watch for sure. You mentioned being challenged, so Pep clearly doesn't want yes men around him.
No, but what everybody says about Pep is he's got most of the answers most of the time anyway. The important thing, one of the key things about this is Guardiola wants somebody who's got the solutions. When he has got a doubt, maybe he's identified they can attack, I don't know, let's say Burnley. We need to attack Burnley down the left. How are we going to do it? And he needs somebody there to say, oh, well, this is what we can do. This is how we can do it. You can play this pass into here because their centre-back will get drawn to the ball here and all this kind of thing. And Juanma Lillo is exactly of that mould. He had that when Torrent was his assistant at Bayern Munich and then at City for 2 years. He had it with Mikel Arteta, which is just because Arteta went straight into it from playing, it makes it sound like it might be quite easy to be Pep's number two. After, a year of being a coach, he stepped up 2 years in to be the assistant, and he was on Guardiola's wavelength exactly. And Juanma Lillo is too. Rodolfo Borrell, who stepped up when Arteta left in December, he's a very good coach. He's very good one-on-one with the players, and particularly young players. He helps, bring through the City Academy players to the training environment. But he's not quite got that same characteristic of being able to give Pep answers when he needs them. And what Arteta could do was Guardiola would be on the touchline, he'd maybe see something on the pitch he'd not be happy with, turn around, and he would know Arteta would have some solutions. And that's why Juanma Lillo was there. But yeah, the first thing on the day it was announced that Leo was coming in, I sent a message to somebody who knows Pep. Well, this is interesting. He went, yeah, big challenge for Pep. A big challenge for Pep. Because Juanma Lillo is even more kind of ideological and wedded to attacking football than Guardiola is. And maybe that's why he's not had quite so much success. Obviously, the quality of the players. But I think he's a bit more gung-ho even than Guardiola. So he may, there will be new challenges there in that sense.
Well, that's pretty exciting for City fans. And especially because you imagine an assistant coming in now will be more with thoughts of next season and beyond. Firstly, is that the case, that's when we'll really start to see Leo's influence take effect? And secondly, does it suggest that Pep is looking beyond one more year now? He's looking into the future with Man City, or is that just too unpredictable to say?
Juanma Lillo's appointment doesn't tell us anything about that. When it was announced that he signed a 1-year contract, I see the replies on Twitter, people were saying, oh, well, that means he's going after a year. Or some people were like, oh, well, that means he's obviously planning to stick around and he's, But the long and the short of it is, it doesn't make sense to give him a 2-year contract when Pep and the rest of his staff are on one. Like, even if City did think Pep was going to stay, they wouldn't be able to kind of give the game away like that. But they, as far as I know, they don't know that. We don't know from this. Like I say, it wouldn't make any sense to keep him for any longer. And as much as anything, like I say, Guardiola needs a certain number two. It's almost like thinking, oh, is he just going to buy a player who's not good enough, or almost like a £150 million player just for his last season? It's not quite as simple as that, because City have got a sporting director in place and they've got a project. Guardiola will want to do the job as best as he can, and part of that is having a number two. He wouldn't go through his last season, if it is to be his last, without that. So he's thinking about the next game and how best to help the team, and the contract will sort itself out. But Leo's appointment doesn't necessarily tell us anything about, he could have easily said, come and join me for a year in Manchester, or he could say, well, I'm going to be there for 2 or 3 years. Do you fancy it? And he might have said, well, I'll only do a year, or, and anything could happen. We don't know.
You've written about the worst kept secret at Manchester City, that Leroy Sané will not be signing a new contract. There has been an offer on the table for quite some time. He hasn't accepted it. Pep's talked publicly at last now about the situation. Do you imagine that the right offer will come in for him to leave, or he'll go on a free next summer?
It's been quite obvious that he wasn't going to sign this contract at City and he wants to go to Bayern Munich. But ironically, I do think it might be a bit of a saga now, because I was speaking to Rafa Honigstein last week to put the article together explaining why Sané wants to leave, which you can read, obviously, on The Athletic. And Rafa floated the idea, after the conversations he'd been having, that it would be quite typical for Bayern to kind of lowball the club who's got the player who wants out with a year left on his contract. So the club don't sell, and then they could say, well, we'll give you 20 million euros as a signing on fee and you can come to us for free. Now, I mean, whether that suits Sané will then have effectively been waiting 2 years for a transfer. And I mean, I don't know if it suits Bayern in the way that if you take that risk, you may well have an agreement with the agent, but nothing's really to stop Liverpool or Real Madrid or whoever else coming in and offering more in the next year. So that's certainly possible. It is a possibility that Bayern and City don't agree and Bayern will try and get him on a free. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I don't think it's definitely going to happen that Bayern offer too much. Talking about 35, 40 million, which seems like it would be an absolute steal, really. And you can go into the right and wrongs of it, but I don't know if City would be getting too much more than that. You'd be thinking value-wise, how good a player he is. You'd be thinking 80, something like that at least. But I don't think City are going to be getting anywhere near that. And I think City, it's quite obvious from the way Guardiola said it the other day. Because why say it? Why say it now? It's been obvious for a while. So they obviously want it out there. They don't want questions about why Sané is or isn't playing every week. They want to clear it up and move on, basically. So if they can get a decent fee out of Bayern, City are definitely ready to do that, but Bayern might not be.
My column today has a contribution from Laurie Whitwell on Real Madrid wanting the second leg of the Champions League semi-final against City moved from the Etihad Stadium to a neutral venue. Now, City will want to push back on that, given that they played Real Madrid in their home ground and they will feel entitled to play at home in the second leg. But it does bring this tricky relationship with UEFA from their FFP case back to the fore. I imagine it will be staged at the Etihad Stadium, but it doesn't seem clear-cut from Laurie's understanding.
To be fair to UEFA, I get the impression they've given the clubs every opportunity, I think, to host the second legs at the original stadium where it was supposed to be. But obviously it depends on government requirements, I suppose. This might be a way Real Madrid are trying to change the thinking a little. The logistics of it, how easy will it be for Madrid? They could fly to Manchester quite easily in their, kind of quarantine environment, private plane, as they would normally do. But, the logistics of getting to Manchester and making sure it's a controlled environment for the duration of the stay, and where would they stay for 2 days, and how could they get those guarantees? I can see that being difficult. So again, I'm not sure what will happen. I think UEFA do want them to be at the original stadiums, but it may not be the case. And I think Madrid they could be a bit cheeky with it and say it's difficult, but as well as being cheeky, I do think they might raise some good points. And that just comes back to the awkward reality. The whole reason we've got football now is it's not ideal. They needed to get football on for the future of the game, but they haven't got fans in the stadium. It's not ideal at all. It would be ideal if they could, in terms of this Champions League second leg, if they could play it at the Etihad, but the reality may be different. So yeah, I'm sure Madrid will try and push for any advantage possible. And while some of it may be a bit cheeky, I'm sure there are good reasons for it, because I think it would be difficult logistically to get to Manchester for 2 or 3 days and make sure you're safe.
Sam, thank you. Sam is also co-host of our City podcast, Why Always Us? So head there now for reaction to their game against Burnley. Well, we still don't know the dates of the transfer window, but one player who will not be short of admirers once it opens is Aston Villa's Jack Grealish. Gregg Evans is our Villa writer and joins us now. Greg, is there any way Villa can keep hold of Grealish?
It certainly feels like his time is coming towards the end now. I mean, obviously we've seen in the past Villa's current owners have dug their heels in when Tottenham Hotspur came calling for Jack Grealish in 2018. It feels like it's a different story now. Obviously, if Villa get relegated, we know that Jack Grealish will be on the move. There's no way that the club will be able to keep hold of him then, and he will probably move on to the highest bidder. Obviously, we know Manchester United are interested, but if Villa do get relegated, then other clubs will come into the scenario. It all really depends on how Villa end this season and whether they can survive or not.
Is it Man United, or are there other suitors who would be in for him too? Yeah,
I mean, the Manchester United interest is very strong. It's also my understanding that there are other clubs interested, and that if Villa actually get relegated, that might open up the potential option for some clubs on the continent. Also my understanding that Jack Grealish wouldn't necessarily be adverse to moving away. It's just something that he will consider at the end of the season, obviously just keeping his options open.
If I flip it over to the Villa side, who will be leading these negotiations?
The co-owner of the club, Nassif Sawaris, the Egyptian businessman, and Wes Edens, who's also the co-owner of Milwaukee Bucks, the NBA basketball team, obviously own the club. Christian Purslow, the CEO, is effectively in charge of the day-to-day running of the club, so he will be leading most of the negotiations. Villa do have a sporting director, of course, Suso, full name Jesus Pitash. He will be dealing with a lot of transfers and maybe taking some of the early calls and speaking to some of the representatives around various deals. But it's my understanding that Christian Purslow has a very hands-on role and likes to be in charge of the real big deals, and Jack Grealish will certainly be one of those.
And is there anything else we should be looking out for in the summer in terms of really big developments on the sort of transfer front at Villa, or is it all about Grealish at the moment? Could Tyrone Mings come into the picture, for example?
Again, David, it's one that depends on what division Villa are playing in next season. If they survive, then they'll be desperate to keep hold of their best players. Tyrone Mings being another one of those. I can't see Tyrone Mings, an England international, wanting to stay in the Championship, and there will certainly be Premier League clubs looking at him. I think he's had a decent season. I think he's led the back line very well. He's clearly a Premier League player now, despite not having really the time to prove it at Bournemouth because of his previous injuries. So John McGinn's also another one. I feel like we haven't really seen the best of him since he's come back, since Project Restart. I know it's only been 2 games and he missed a large chunk of the season with an ankle injury, but before his injury in December he was turning into one of the most influential midfielders in the division. Again, another one that clubs will be looking at.
Yeah, I understand there is interest in Tyrone Mings from a couple of big Premier League clubs. I think that Arsenal like him too, but whether that manifests itself in a bid, whether they could afford the sort of fee that Villa would be looking for, and the same applies for those that would be contending for his signature were he to be available, is a completely different matter. Greg, thanks very much. You can read plenty more from Greg over on The Athletic and hear him on our Villa podcast, 1874. Right, that's it. Make sure you subscribe and download the Athletic app if you haven't already. Go to theathletic.com/Ornstein and Chapman and enjoy a 40% discount. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.